What's good in the whole YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you guys another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Kamen Rider Build, episode 49. This episode is called The Tomorrow Build Will Create, and it is the very last episode of Kamen Rider Build. This episode overall was really good. A lot of really good things happened. It's set up for the next season of Kamen Rider, which will be Kamen Rider Zeo, which is an entirely different iteration in the series. Again, Kamen Rider, for those who don't know, is a series that every single time they do a season, the next season has a completely different story that they go into with new characters. Though in this case with Zeo, it will bring back Kamen Rider Build in the first two episodes. Build and Ryoga and Crossy are going to return in the first two episodes to make a cameo appearance and kind of set up things for Kamen Rider Zeo, or Dio, as he's going to be otherwise referred to. The spelling is Zeo, but the pronunciation is like Geo, so just wanted to make that clear. Anyway, let's get started. Basically, the way that this episode started was it continued where the previous episode ended, like all Kamen Rider Build episodes have pretty much done, where in this case, Ryoga and Evolto had gone into like the big red hole, just so that Evolto could be destroyed potentially, as well as sending Ryoga in there so that by him being destroyed, all Evolto's DNA would be completely obliterated. Well, what happens is that Sento realizes that he needs to go in there and ensure that things are handled properly, and he's not going to let his friend just go off like that. So what happens is that at that point, he decides to use his rabbit mode, because currently he can't use Genius mode anymore, because Genius mode was destroyed when the two panels were forming and the lost bottles were used and everything to create the two worlds. And as they were still kind of merging, it was the situation where he lost the Genius bottle. So he actually uses the rabbit mode, and he jumps up into that portal. And what happens is he ends up in this kind of desert area, similar to like the Skywall area almost in a way, just because of how desert-like it is. And what happens is that he ends up having to fight Evolto in his final form again. This time Evolto seems to have actually assimilated Ryoga, meaning that he has absorbed his energy, and Ryoga's inside of him. But this time, rather than assimilating Ryoga and just having him as part of him, in this case, Ryoga has a little bit more control. And what happens is that Sento ends up trying to fight him, initially using rabbit mode. He does switch to rabbit tank sparkly mode, which is one we haven't seen in quite some time. And there's even a point where he uses rabbit tank mode, which is the standard rabbit tank mode. The thing is that Evolto mentions the fact that I created you as a fake hero, as this, pathetic hero that was meant to be a sham. And the thing is that Evolto basically looks to him as this kind of made-up hero that he didn't really think much of. Yet in reality, Sento considers him being a hero very important, and the other thing is that he connects with the fact that his friends were the thing that really made him who he was. They're the reason why he became who he was, which is extremely accurate to his character. Everything that really happened was because of everyone that he interacted with. It wasn't something like he just became that way. No. He grew from them. He was built up from them. And that's very important, and everyone that he encountered. And in some shows that's not always the case, but this show it definitely was, because again, you have to remember, he started off with basically having complete amnesia of who he was and his history, and he grew and restored himself and had new memories and had old memories, and it was a complete piece now. So the thing is that Sento does fight. He uses those three modes that I mentioned. Eventually, Ryoga also tries to fight back inside of Evolto, trying to stop him in his tracks and, make Sento remember that he's important and he can finish off Evolto. At one point, Evolto does manage to get pretty darn beaten up, but at one point, Evolto actually manages to silence Ryoga, and so then Sento and Evolto continue to fight. There's tons of battling that occurs. Eventually, Sento actually uses, with the weapon that he uses with the rabbit or the tank, like the gun weapon, that's also a sword he uses. He actually uses it with rabbit tank mode, just the standard rabbit tank mode. And what happens is that he actually puts in the rabbit and the dragon bottle to fight against him, and he does pretty well. And then he actually puts those into the build driver, so he becomes rabbit tank. He has this rabbit tank form, rabbit dragon form. And what happens is that with the rabbit dragon form, he does his rider kick finishing move, where he goes in and he swoops down, and you see like the graph and all that, and the chart of him like swooping in, and he goes in to defeat Evolto. And as he does this, Ryoga also tries to help out Sento, and they manage to defeat Evolto. As this happens, the two worlds come together, and what happens is that the worlds become one, and now the Skywall incident had never happened, leading to a lot of things changing. Specifically, no one having any recollection of the Skywall incident aside from Sento. And also the other thing is that Sento has no idea where Ryoga is, but when he wakes up, after being knocked out and sent to this new world, he's actually holding on to the Cross-Z Ride Watch. The Ride Watch, for those who don't know, is for Kamen Rider Dio. It will be an item that will be the gimmick item for that season. We have bottles for Kamen Rider Build. For that season, they have ride watches, and the ride watches allow Kamen Rider Dio to basically obtain the powers and utilize the form of that rider. So in other words, he'll be able to use the form of Kamen Rider Cross-Z as an example in this case. So just keep that in mind. I wanted to make that clear, so if anyone's wondering what they were looking at in the episode, that's exactly what that was. It was supposed to be the ride watch. So as far as things go, what does end up happening is that there's also the point that's brought up by Katsuragi to Sento, basically saying that all of his friends will have no recollection of who he is, and they'll have lived very different lives in this world because they'll never had to have experienced the difficulties of the Skywall incident. What we actually end up seeing is that, for example, Gentaku is working as the Prime Minister aide. The Prime Minister that was for Totoro is the main Prime Minister, and also he's still alive in this case. Gentaku is the aide, and what happens is that Sawa is working as a journalist, which she does end up approaching Gentaku, but Gentaku is actually, in this case, rather than being against her like he was initially when, like, during the first episode or so, he wanted her to actually go to his office and speak about journalism and just answer some questions. And he was fine with it. Also, the building is known as a government office. It's not really known as a institute like it was in Totoro, where they work. So that's very different now. Additionally, what happens is that when it comes to I'm trying to think now, what was the other thing? Oh, yeah. When it comes to Namba, rather than it being called like the Namba Institute or whatever that they had before, now it's called the Namba Machine Workhouse or Workshop, basically, meaning that they develop machines. They're not there to train military grade soldiers. They're there to just make simple machines, basically, and we actually get to see that in this episode, which is pretty crazy to just watch all that happen, because it really just shows a change in everything. It shows that the characters are not the way that we knew them. They're very different. For example, the fact that like Utsumi is just working as like a regular workshop person and not just someone that's destructive and causes trouble. In fact, in this episode, we actually see him trying to break a metal bar, and he actually hurts his leg. Well, obviously, in earlier episodes, we saw where he actually snapped a cane. So obviously, they were trying to play a reference to that right there. Additionally, what we ended up seeing was Kazumi is with his friends that had originally died in this world, and what happens is that they go to the cafe where the main base is in the regular story, and what happens is that his friends think that he'll have a huge crush on this girl, which actually turns out to be Mizora, but in this case he has no idea who Mizora is. So his friends bring him over there, and I guess that means that Mitten probably doesn't exist in this world, which makes sense because of the fact that Mitten shouldn't exist, because the only reason why she existed in the first place excuse me. The only reason why she existed in the first place was because she was there to give hope to those that were suffering during the Skywall incident. She wasn't created by Mizora for any other reason other than that. She was meant for that reason specifically. So in this case, when they refer to her as being like an idol-like character, when they see her, it's a much bigger surprise, and they have no prior knowledge of her aside from seeing her at the cafe. That's the big difference. And when Kazumi sees her, he does crush on her. So that does happen regardless, and that makes sense. Like, that should happen. But as far as knowing of each other, that shouldn't happen, because there's no reason for them to know of each other. Because of the fact that she never was online, and he never, prior to then, had been probably to that area. So that's pretty important. Additionally, what does end up happening is that eventually we end up seeing Sento discussing with Katsuragi about their dad wanted to make this peaceful world, and that's part of the reason why the genius bottle had to be destroyed and used in order to accomplish this, and it was not something that was made and was part of the main plan. So in the end, it made sense that it had to be destroyed with the Pandora's box and everything else. So that's a very important detail, and the panels as well. Now, what also ends up happening is that after Katsuragi goes away, like, he's done, he's accomplished what he needed to. I forgot to also mention this. When the two worlds come together, what happens is that Vernage says they've completely finished Evolto and my job is done, and the bracelet that Mizora has actually falls off of her, and Mizora holds on to it, grasping it, but she can't use it anymore. So I just wanted to mention that detail. I forgot to say it. But anyway, continuing on, after Katsuragi disappears and there's just Sento now, the only one that actually let me get to this next part. He goes into the cafe. He ends up meeting up with Mizora. The thing is that Mizora says, "Do I know you? You look familiar from somewhere." And the thing is that Mizora's father actually ends up saying something which is kind of funny to think about. He says, "Oh, I know where you know him. He's Sato Tata. Sato. What's his name? I'm trying to remember the other name that he has. His father is Isarugi, but Mizora's father is Isarugi, but no, it's not Isarugi. What am I thinking of? I'm actually forgetting what was his Sato. His human persona that he had, that was the other half of him. I'm forgetting the name of it. I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. The form that combined Katsuragi and his other form into Sento. So the thing is that that's how he knows him. And what happens is that Mizora's father wants to get an autograph, but Mizora's like, no. And after they get a drink of coffee or whatever, basically Mizora and her father run off. So then at this point, what happens is that Sento goes into the middle of the city. He realizes that he's the only one this time that remembers everything that happened, which is very much so interesting because of the fact that initially he knew nothing and everyone knew everything, and he in this case knows everything and they know nothing. So it's a very interesting change of tides, and what happens is that with him being alone and being left to not being remembered, it's this kind of sad moment until Ryoga suddenly appears, and it's the real Ryoga. I forgot to also mention there is a part where he actually sees the Ryoga of this world, where Ryoga actually has black hair and his girlfriend's still alive. It does happen, and he does try to go up to him, but what happens is that the girlfriend mentions, oh, maybe he knows you from being a martial arts fan, and so he's like, oh, I guess it's a fan. And so what happens is that Sento's like, I'm just glad to see you're alive, and he gives him a handshake, and at that point, what happens is he goes off, and Ryoga is confused. Now, what I was going to say before, though, was he sees the real Ryoga this time. No one remembers him, and what happens is that Sento mentions that probably has to do with the fact that in this world you would have never existed due to the fact that you had Evolto's DNA, and without Evolto, how would you have existed otherwise? The fact that he even existed in the first place is a mystery, just because of the fact that why should he even exist, period? He shouldn't exist. I guess the color in his hair probably has to do with Evolto's DNA, and that's why his hair in this case was black rather than the color that it was in the show. It's kind of interesting to think that's how they kind of distinguish it and make it stand out, but it is interesting. Now, as far as things go, Sento does summon his bike, and Sento and Ryoga ride off. They actually ride through the same part that they rode through during the first episode, and there's actually a joke that actually references the very first episode, where he says, "Oh, your fly's open, Ryoga," and he says, "How long has that been like that?" And he said, "Since the battle with Evolto." And he's like, "Are you serious?" Which is a reference to the first episode, just because his fly was open during the first episode as well when he went on the bike and he had to zipper it. So that's basically what happened for this episode. It was pretty good. A lot of stuff happened, and I just want to say this much right now. I thought the season was really, really good season. I like Kamen Rider Build a lot. Not every single Kamen Rider season is amazing, but this one was definitely up there as being one of the better seasons we've had, especially in recent years. Don't get me wrong, we've had some really good seasons. X-A was great, but Ghost isn't super popular. And then if you go further back, it really depends per season. But just in general, I'm looking forward to Geo. That will be starting next week, so I will be reviewing that. I'll be starting with episode 1 for that show next week, so look forward to that. The preview, from what we saw, does show off Ryoga and Sento will be in it, and we learn about the Demon King, which will be the main rider, and there's a couple characters that are shown off in that, and look forward to hearing from me more when I start reviewing that next week. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and I'll see you guys in Kamen Rider Zeo reviews. So bye bye, guys.